So here's the thing. I have a project for my psychology class, and I figured I'd turn it into a video essay. Let's go.
Did you get it?
So media often has a way of villainizing mental illness. So when something portrays it in a more neutral or even potentially a fairly good light, it genuinely impresses me. This is true for a show I adore, Doom Patrol, and one of its main characters, Crazy Jane, and its portrayal of dissociative identity disorder. So, before we discuss the portrayal of Doom Patrol in DID, I want to clearly define what DID actually is. So, naturally, I brought in my girlfriend to give what I personally believe is a very generally held definition and viewpoint on DID, since she has pretty much no knowledge of psychology and has only seen a small handful of episodes of Doom Patrol. Take it away, babe.
As the designated outsider to the world of psychology, I can only make guesses as to the specifics of DID. I think that sufferers experience some sort of personality fracturing in which multiple personalities end up existing in a single body, and I've heard that it's sometimes confused with schizophrenia due to some similar symptoms. If I had to guess at its prevalence, I would assume it to be super rare, because you don't hear about it much, so I'd guess somewhere around 2 to 4%, give or take a few decimal points. As for the demographics of sufferers, I think that white women tend to suffer from personality disorders generally more than men, and given the pressure that society places on them to suppress as much as they do, the fracturing of those suppressed traits would be a logical, if extreme, escalation. But the most notorious example of DID in the media is actually a man, Psycho's Norman Bates, who, in my inexperienced opinion, seems to align more with DID than the diagnosis he gets at the end of schizophrenia. Unfortunately, a lot of representations of the disorder in the media tend to be framed by similarly negative connotations as Norman's. They get trapped in the role of villainy. I think that's just fear of the unknown, and I think it's one of the most tragic features of human nature. It leads us to hate rather than to understanding. The sufferers are very sick people, but the sense of mystery around the disorder allows audiences to be more easily deluded and entertained by the uniqueness of their situation. I may not know much, but I do know that it shouldn't be that way.
So I'd consider that to be a pretty general description of what most people think DID is, but it's not 100% accurate. So, to define it medically, dissociative identity disorder, formerly known as a subset of schizophrenia called multiple personality disorder, is defined as a dissociative disorder in which the individual has two or more distinct personalities or selves, each with its own memories, behaviors, and relationships. And yes, I read that from my textbook. Some characteristics include dissociative amnesia, dissociative fugue, and blurred identity. The average amount of personalities is recorded around 2 to 4, but often escalates to about 13 to 15 over the course of treatment. Grace's population estimate is surprisingly close, but it does actually linger more in the range of 1/2 to 2% of the population. However, it's speculated that around 7% of the population has DID and remains undiagnosed. She was actually dead on with her demographics guess, with the average diagnosis occurring in women around age 30. Most often, DID manifests in individuals who've experienced some form of trauma, with about 90% of DID patients having experienced some form of childhood abuse or neglect. While the iconic Norman Bates is a great example of media portrayal of DID, others include Kevin Wendell Crumb from M. Night Shyamalan's Split, and the severely unappreciated Marvel Comics character Moon Knight. However, I do want to zero in on the aforementioned Crazy Jane. She's kind of the only portrayal of DID that I consider to be healthy in any way, shape, or form. For those who don't know, Jane is a DC Comics character portrayed by Diane Guerrero in the HBO Max original Doom Patrol. Jane is shown and diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder with 64 unique personalities that each have their own superpowers. While DID is explored throughout the series, I really want to focus on the 9th episode of Season 1, Jane Patrol, which almost serves as kind of a tour of the representation of Jane's psyche known as the Underground.
What you know about the underground?
While it's never explicitly stated, it's heavily implied in the show that Jane, or Kate Chalice as she was once known, was a victim of sexual abuse from her father at an incredibly young age. The show often uses imagery representative of her childhood to provide a meaningful representation for what's going on in Jane's mind, such as the use of the well that Kay was lowered into as a girl being used to portray the death of one of her alters, or the use of puzzle pieces turning into her father, as the main memory of Kay's trauma comes from sexual abuse while trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle. While the show does lean into the comic book aspects of Jane's abilities and mental illness, and shows a physical manifestation of Jane's shifting personalities, such as Silvertongue's makeup and Karen's hair color, Guerrero does actually change tone of voice, posture, mannerisms, and her vocabulary to suit each personality.
Don't fucking touch me! Oh, please touch me.
Which is pretty consistent with how DID patients actually behave. It's both a testament to the quality of Guerrero's acting, which she has gone on record saying that has pushed her to therapy, and it's a testament to the depths that the writers go to portray DID in an effective and accurate way. While some of Jane's personalities are somewhat aggressive, the show never actively demonizes them, which is far and away better than most other representations of the mental illness, which often go out of their way to portray DID patients as murderous psychopaths.
You killed them. We killed them.
Ultimately, dissociative identity disorder isn't really something we should be demonizing, and it's sad that media often does. Pretty much none of the media accessible is a good representation, except Doom Patrol. But that does still have the major fallacy of using DID as a gimmick to tell interesting stories in a comic book setting, no matter how accurate of a portrayal it is. To the show's credit, it is pretty accurate, and generally the show does a pretty good job portraying mental illness and trauma overall. I think the poor portrayal of DID in media is genuinely harmful, and it's not only a detriment to those affected by it, but a detriment to society by adding to a mounting sense of ignorance and maliciousness to those that are different being perceived as dangerous. While I understand the desire for writers to jump to a rather interesting mental illness as a method for telling effective and affecting stories, the wholesale demonization of those with dissociative identity disorder is genuinely depressing, as there's nothing inherently wrong with it as a psychological response to severe trauma. However, it's not something that should be taken with any sense of deification either, as it is a serious mental health problem and treatment is something that should be taken seriously. Overall, my hope is that Doom Patrol sets an example for writers aiming to tackle the struggles of dissociative identity disorder, especially considering the aforementioned Moon Knight is receiving an upcoming Disney Plus show. If anything, it's guaranteed to be a step up from Split and Psycho.